third session of our 8-part series on using Lean Six Sigma Black Belt skills outside of Lean Six Sigma projects. Today the topic is scorecard development, and we will be hearing from Rick Haynes once again. Just to briefly run through the slides, the logistics of the webinar. It will last about 1 hour. Please be sure to insert your questions through the GoToWebinar software. We really appreciated all the feedback and interaction last time, so please be sure to let us know when you have questions throughout the webinar, but at the end also. We will be providing you a link to the recording in case you want to rewatch or miss any parts, and then we'll send you an email with a copy of the slides as well. So again, please send in your questions throughout the webinar. There will be an exit survey at the end, and then be on the lookout for the follow-up email with the links to the recording and a copy of the slides, and we'll be updating you with the session 4 login information soon. So I will now turn over the presentation to Rick, and we'll get started. Thanks.
Well, hello everybody. Again, this is the third of the series to talk about how Lean Six Sigma belts can use those skills outside of projects. Today, talking about scorecard development. The reference again will be our Volume 2 book that Forrest Breyfogle wrote. Talks about what we call the enterprise DMAIC, and that we're going to talk about a piece of that which is really scorecard building. Specifically, it comes from Chapter 7 in that book. So that's number 3. Got a couple things going through. This one is, I guess, appropriate for right now. I'm dealing with 2 clients right now on this exact topic, and Forrest and I were talking about an hour before this webinar about a company that's struggling with this development issue. I guess putting the webinar together made me real sensitive to it, so it's real to me right now. First question we have is a little bit about you guys, the participants here, on using the scorecards and dashboards. I'm interested to see what companies actually go about doing it. We find that nearly every one has got some measure or some type of scorecard or dashboard. The question is who really uses them, and is it just the leadership, or do they deploy down to everybody in the organization? Because it'll lead to we get the voice of the customer in a few minutes. Looks like a majority of you saying all of the management uses them. It's coming up big. Mallory, I guess you can close it off now. Give you a minute or a couple seconds here. And it looks like all the management won, all levels of the organization and the top management are in there. Now, what do you think's best? Well, generally, if you're going to put the time, it would be great that it's something that everybody can use. So we'll walk into that. Thank you very much. They are very popular today. Why? Why is this even a topic for the webinar series? Well, it turns out they're used to provide a single source for performance measures and metrics. Also, they come with fancy software. A lot of organizations that get these enterprise, I don't even understand what ERP stands for the moment, but that's the SAP and the Oracle for the enterprise data plans. They usually have an add-on or an extra module that does scorecarding for them, so it sounds neat. Plus, if you look at a lot of the leading business articles and books right now, there's a lot of people talking about the advantages of them. The hard part is very few of them tell you how to get a good one together. I personally have worked with the development of one from the ground up in a company, one I happen to work for, and a lot in the consulting we're doing now works on this area too. But there's many ways that people do it today, and versions. There is the software-specific ones. Now, those could be built as part of something or a standalone software. Generally, the magic of those is they can acquire data independently through schedulers to populate the charts. There's Excel-based ones, which I think are probably the most popular, especially when they can use conditional formatting to make red, yellow, and green cells. Looks really nice. There are also people that, even with the software, still print them out on a piece of paper and hand them out to each other and distribute them. But either way, the goal is to manage all of your key performance measures all in one place. Before we dive into how to do it, I think I want to go over, I guess, a Lean Six Sigma project topic, the voice of the customer. Why should you have a scorecard? So if we're going to do it, how should it be created so it meets the needs of my customer? And I guess the customer is both the leadership and the whole organization. People use these for a couple reasons. They want them to identify areas of improvement, opportunities for improvement. There's also the third one, performance issues that the workforce needs. You'd like to distribute performance metrics so the workforce itself can manage itself. Like they can see an indication, they can adjust their processes to keep things where they need to be, so you don't need the leadership to direct it. Plus, the bottom one, it's a way to have information to make decisions with, or database decision making. I think the biggest reason they talk about it in the literature today is the bottom one. But I'll say those of us that have been in the Lean Six Sigma or other process improvement worlds, it's probably the top two in this list that make the biggest deal. There's a little more we should look into in the Lean Six Sigma side of it. Having a good scorecard system, meaning data collection and charting, provides information that you can attach to your control plans for your projects. A lot of the control plans, if you do it well, are going to have some type of monitoring and charting to decide if it's acceptable or not. It also can be used to drive good process behavior by the management. We'll talk firefighting goes away. In other words, they don't overreact because your scorecard tells them that, yes, it varied, but it's okay right now, don't act. And the bottom one is clear measures of capability. Now, meaning we know exactly where we are today. If the customer asks for something, we can pop up a screen and know exactly what we can do. Now let's throw some assumptions in as we're going to be using to build our scorecards. One, pictures are better than tables of numbers. Hope you all agree. Data quality. Well, continuous data is better than attribute or count data. Quantitative, real numbers are better than qualitative, such as survey data. And I know the last one seems a bit rhetorical, but having data is better than no data. I mean, I've seen scorecards that people put how they feel about it. It's okay or it's not okay. I don't think that's even qualitative. The one I struggle with the most with clients is the next one. All metrics aren't equal. I mean, just because you can track it doesn't mean you should track it with the equal intensity to all the others. It's very difficult to take an organization focused on which are the key ones, especially if you do it by popularity and voting and asking. And another one's too many metrics. I guess early in my career as a process engineer, my engineering department had 760 metrics to manage for a 500-person manufacturing facility. I had about 20 engineers, and we were trying to manage over 700 metrics because we could. It killed us. General rule is any person shouldn't track or manage or watch, pay attention to, or whatever, more than 10 to 12 metrics. 7 to 8 is considered good, but never over 10 to 12. So if you've got scorecards that are bigger than that, they get overwhelming. All right. Another question now. I'm trying to spread the questions out a bit more today. If you're using scorecards, dashboards, how are they used in your operation? What types? Now, this is a pick more than one. There's the proprietary part of your business system, proprietary standalone ones, custom ones, like you guys wrote them or your organization did, such as Excel, and even if you made it with a C program or some Visual Basic. Last one's printed and distributed. I mean, you don't look at it with this PC or the network. And the other one's none. All right? It looks like customize is winning a lot, and I assume that's because a lot of it's the Excel red, yellow, green type scorecards. If you don't mind, oh, look at that. It is clearly the customized or the software ones. I'd be interested to know if you can get a chance when you're just typing in your stuff. Mallory's here watching them. I'm going to try to have a little more input. There's a point coming up that I'm going to ask all of you to enter a couple things. But one, if you're using, if you chose the customized off-the-shelf software and you're using Excel or something else, could you just send a little note in if it's Excel or what software you did it on? I'd appreciate it sometime before the end. All right. Now, the next thing you get to is how you're going to display it. Now, that was really the prior webinar. If you saw it, we talked about the idea of predictability and what do you predict is a good way to do a scorecard. All right? We're not really going to discuss all that today. If you have a question on it, you can ask it at the end. I guess you can ask it whenever you want. But right now, that's where we are. So we're not going to talk about that. Let's talk about the most common literature out there on scorecards. It came about with the Balanced Scorecard from Kaplan and Norton and Harvard, who published a single paper in the Harvard Business Review that was taken so well, they've since written 2 books on it. What they came about was saying that a business could only perform well if the metrics they were choosing to make decisions on were balanced, as in they covered all aspects of success. Now, this is a diagram out of their first paper, but they said you needed financial metrics, internal business processes, which was really either it's manufacturing or service or whatever, learning and growth, which were your people metrics, your workforce metrics, and then customer metrics. And each of those categories should have objectives, measures, goals, targets. I mean, it was a wonderful idea. If you look through all 4 of them, you can look at examples where somebody did not consider the balance and messed up. When I think of who exceeded the financial issue and didn't pay attention, the other ones might have been Enron. All they cared about was meeting their financials, and they ended up putting the company out of business. All right? People who ignore the customers. Who ignore the customers? I mean, I'm old. But Xerox, when Xerox came out with copiers, I swear when I was at Texas Instruments, we had probably 20 copiers in the machine, and we had our own service guy that just went machine to machine to keep the paper jams fixed. But they ignored their customers because we hated it. We spent a fortune for it, but as soon as people invented copiers that didn't jam, everybody had a new one, and there's very little Xerox copiers out there now. They ignored their customer and lost the business. What internal business processes? It's tougher to find. These are people who fail to execute in their own business and end up damaging their company. They just ignored it and ignored the others to do the internal business process. We had a student come through one of our classes that worked for a bowling ball manufacturer, and he spoke of how great their lean process is, how they leaned out their processes so heavily that they were just made them very cheap. They got things done quick. It turned out that he'd left the company, moved on, and Forrest, the owner here, had gone in consulting with them, found out that they had been bought up by a large bowling ball manufacturer because they were losing money. So they worked so hard to improve their internal processes, they forgot the rest of it and still failed. Learning and growth, it's a tougher one if you have a case where you spend so much time on your people, you ignore the rest of it. Well, there was an article in the Wall Street Journal recently, I think it was yesterday in the people section, yesterday being the 24th of August, that said that should a company be worried about being good to their people and good to their neighborhood and social environment, and it said you should never do that if it's going to damage the real reason your business, which is to make money. But sometimes you can be too focused on doing good and not doing your business and forget about it. And last, I threw one in here that's one of my favorites when I actually use this concept, the compliance. How are you doing managing your compliance? Just because you're compliant, if you ignore it, you can fail. If you spend too much time on it, you end up overstaffing, spend so much money, you don't end up doing your real job. But there's other ones that you can choose, but the idea is having a balance.
Hey, Rick, we have a question.
All right.
This is in reference to slide 12, I believe, and it says, where do red, yellow, green scorecards go on the list?
Oh, where was that? Okay. Now we're talking about places you can do it. And red, yellow, green scorecards are something I would not recommend. And if you're probably sitting there and go, wow, we use them, we like them. It's really not part of this webinar, but red, yellow, and green scorecards do not feel, I can go back to the voice of the customer here. I think we are on 16, so I'll come back to it. Right here. Pictures are better than charts. We really believe that you should show, if you want to see trends, you really need line charts. Control charts are better. Red, yellow, greens have a habit. Those are really based on your specifications because you generally define yellow, red, or green based on your specifications. So those are really capability monitoring charts. They're really not measuring process performance over time the same way as you want to be. Just because you're out of spec doesn't mean that you should act upon it if you're doing a process measure. Now, if it's quality control, I can see it's acting on it. But if it's just your process and it's red because it's not meeting your current goal, should you act this month and not the last? Now, I mean, our courses talk an awful lot about it, but generally we don't recommend red, yellow, and green, although I believe it is probably the most popular one for most managers because green is good, red is bad. But I'll tell you, it doesn't lead to the right behavior.
Okay, and then the next question is back to the balanced scorecard that you were just speaking of. Why do you not recommend it?
Ooh, that's right here, balanced scorecard. The reason we don't use it isn't because of the balance issue. If you look in the center of that graphic, one thing these guys did is when they put it together, they were really looking at monitoring performance. And what they said is you get together, set your strategy, and then build your metrics around your strategies. It's what you're going to see in this webinar, and it's our position that strategy should come after you've measured your performance, not from a group of people deciding that this is what we need to do. And that's my big issue with the Kaplan and Norton method. Your vision statement is a group creative process, but strategies should not be set by a group popularity contest because who knows if they're right, who knows how you're going to measure them, and I would argue some strategies, and I think that was a prior lecture in this series, but strategies that don't have ways to measure them are hard to do. And so we really recommend strategies come after you've balanced your metrics, not before. And that's the big reason we don't recommend their method. If you pick up the balanced scorecard books, they teach a very traditional, qualitative, strategic planning work, the stuff that we did 20 years ago. They have better pictures and better graphics, but it's the what would you like the strategy to be type process. And we really believe now with all the tools we have, you should derive them from data, performance, not opinion. Thank you for those two questions. Let's get into developing it now, if there isn't any more. We're going to start with what's called a value chain. Now, this is not a value stream map. It's a value chain. I'm going to sort of build one schematically here as we go through this. But it's really just a diagram of your business functions. Little picture on the lower right of one. You list all the functions you do in your business, both to create value to your customer and the ones that you need for yourself, what in Lean we would call the business value added or not value added but necessary stuff at the bottom. Each of those you link performance metrics to each function. You add the voice of the customer collection at the beginning and the reporting of financials at the end, and you've got a value chain. Now let's walk through the steps of doing it. First, you list the primary functions that your business does. Now, they are as generic as it looks on the screen. Develop, market, sell. Now, this is an example we use, but you might want to do produce and deliver as two different blocks. But those are unique functions that have a very specific requirement to be done in the process. Now, I add my reporting of my financials and how I collect the voice of my customer, and I've got my value chain. Next, what we do is list the other functions of the organization that you need to have to operate. Now, this is generic we're looking at. It's not complete. Labor relations could be human resources, but there are departments that are called support functions in your organization that need to be there. You can't operate. Why we like this format is those ones at the bottom are generally ignored for performance metrics. Now, if you're going to go for that balance of the balanced scorecard, you really need measurements of all your primary functions, because if any one of them fail, your system goes under, and that's what we're trying to avoid. Now, in our scenario here, these are really built with a process mapping software, and you would make drill downs so you can actually expand on the function to show what they do, such as what do I do to produce, what do I do to market. You create a drill down of another process map. Now, what we're going to be doing is linking performance metrics to different steps within for the function overall and then within the function when we drill down on the process. So what we're going to do is we're going to use a diagram to show where the metrics go. the start of this is you start with your key satellite metrics. Now, I call satellite because we always think about the 30,000-foot ones, the airplane view of the land below you in your organization. The satellite view ones are really the equity metrics, the ones I guess the board of directors, the C-level people care about because they are the ultimate measure of success. Now, you'd think they're the same for every company, but I know they're not. But it's generally, it could be margin, it could be overall revenue, it could be stock price, EBT, EBITDA, however, there's a lot of ways to go look at it, but these are financial metrics. And I generally find companies are either in a decision to grow revenue or to grow margin, but it's usually one of the two are the primary focus of most organizations. Now, in the recession that's been going on for a while, some of them are trying to just hold their own or to have revenue drop slower than the market bears. In that case, you're looking at stock price, but none of them are perfect. Now, what is unique about the satellite metrics is they are not as cause and effect related as all of your business metrics. Stock price is driven by things way beyond your own performance. So is revenue. So is margin. They deal with your customer impact, weather, external environmental issues. That's why those don't have such a causal relationship with your own behavior, but they are the result of everything you do. So we call those satellite metrics. Now we go down to the functions. We'll call those 30,000-foot level metrics. Each of those we're going to look at performance of a function, such as what's it cost, what's the quality, and what's the time it takes to do each function. Now if you think back to project land, isn't that what we dealt with in our define phases when they say if you had a project like I have had that said make it better? The question is what's better? How do I know you're successful? These are the things we do to come up with, is it a cost issue, a quality issue, or a time issue? Now, this is when I'm going to want you guys to grab your keyboards now and type a little bit. What might be performance metrics for a produce and deliver in a simple manufacturing organization? All right. I got the ones in our demo here, but at the same time, I'd like to get some input. Remember, we're going to focus on what might be internal quality, internal cost, or the time functions on this factor. All right. Is anybody writing anything in? Well, all right, maybe I was going to try something that didn't work as well, or you're slower. But let's talk about what would be an internal quality. Now, I'll speak to one I'm working with right now at a company. In a place like this, they had a quality measure which was audited the quality of the product. All right. Well, this was a function that didn't create the product. All they did is it was a distribution center, but they had an audit that they did before it went to the customer. But is that a quality measure for a distribution function? And I'd say no, that's a product quality measure. It's not a functional quality measure. So we've got yield came in. Scrap rates. I'm sure lead time will be in there. There we go. Ooh, first time throughput rate. So I guess that's like rolled throughput yield type button. There's must have manufacturing people out here listening. But let's look at the stuff we have here. These are the ones we would have suggested. There's a lead time in the function. There's a defective rate. Now, it could be yield rate. It could be rolled throughput yield, DPMO, whatever. But that's an internal quality that is issues that are generated within the function. You can have work in progress, which is really the overall load of work in the area. People like on-time delivery. It's not one of my favorite ones, but it's really talking about, are you meeting? That's a schedule meeting thing. We could talk about that. On-time delivery is either yes or no. It's an attribute. Why would you want to collect an attribute data? So I like variance to delivery date. So it's like a plus if it's delivered early, and it's a minus if it's late, and you measure days or hours. Then you get a rich set of continuous data. You can do a lot more than just on-time delivery rate. And the bottom's the throughput measurement, as some people recommended. Raw material cost is one that somebody suggested too. Those are all good stuff. But the concept, you want to focus ones that mean that function. All right? High-level ones. So given this discussion, what I'm proposing in the scorecard generation point is that you select your performance metrics based on the functions that you do. Now note, there was no organizational chart in there. You might have 3 different departments that manufacture, but you have one set of metrics for everybody who manufactures. So what advantages might you have to doing it functionally instead of by the organization chart? So pick all of them you think that apply that might be advantages to doing it functionally based versus org chart based. So please pick I think you can pick all of them that apply. All right, getting some in here. Mallory points out the one I gave out for the second bullet was same metric used for all similar functions across the entire company or organization. So we're wrapping up, put it in here. It looks like everybody says if they reorganize, there's no change. Boy, and that's one of my favorites too. But don't change what the fiscal year was up, and so you can always link your projects and stuff to organizational success. But guess what? I would say that you could have checked all those and been safe. Because really the advantage of doing it functionally, there is everybody does it the same. No matter what you do, this is how we measure a manufacturing step. This is how we measure a development step. Which also means you can do peer-to-peer comparability across all functions of the company that do the same function. And I know if my boss Forrest was in here, he'd say that the best thing about this method is they do not change when strategies change. They don't change when the fiscal year comes and you make new strategies. The reason is a strategy is how to apply a function. It's not necessarily the function. You might have a strategy to grow the revenue or to increase the throughput or reduce the operating costs, but really they're all targeting a performance metric that's based on a function. And that's the advantage of doing it functionally versus an org chart. I've been to a couple companies that actually amaze me in this area. When I ask who you work for, they say, I'm in Joe Johnson's group. And everybody, when they say, who do you work for, when we're having our say hi to everybody discussions, all they talk about is who they work for. Well, people move, but when you start associating to the person and not the function, it becomes scary. That means every manager may be doing his own set of metrics, whatever he wants. It's dangerous. So how do you determine the metrics for each function? That's where I get it. This is probably the most common question I get both in project consulting and business consulting is about finding the right metrics. Even with all the books we read and all the stuff we teach in champion training, most Lean Six Sigma projects can be paraphrased to make something better. And their measure of how to, or their decision on how to measure success is very soft. So in reality, trying to find the right metric for a project is no different than finding the right metrics for a function. Best things to start with. So we're going to talk about a couple things you can do to find out the best metric. Ask the process owner. And I like very generic questions, not what should I measure or what do you measure. What's the last thing that caused the problem and how did you find out? Here's what you're asking is sort of like an FMEA. Here's the failure, but what was the effect? What was being measured that showed you had a problem? That's a lead to the right metric. Or if you improve, what's the last thing you improved? How did the improvement show up to you, or how did it look? How did your leadership or your customer note that you had improved? Now, how they noticed that you improved is, again, a potential metric. And the last one's tougher for me. Please. How do you measure the cost of the process, or how long it takes, or the quality? These are each, if you stay looking at the entire function, you're getting a good answer. What more might you do? If that isn't working, I ask, well, tell me what each function do. What's the purpose of your function? Why do they pay you to do this job? Again, the why is sometime a lead to the right metric. Another one, how do you know if it's done properly? It's another source of metrics. It also might be metrics for your internal process steps. Like if I'm doing delivery as one of my functions, there could be the packing, there could be the logging of the data, there could be the FedEx or the UPS piece, and there could be arrival receipts and data. There might be 5 steps. Well, One of those may have a metric that's a good measure for success, but that isn't the high-level function. That's just a piece of the function. When you get to this point, this is the first time you look for data. What you get it, you analyze it. Generally, you don't want to get a whole bunch. You start doing it slowly. Add a metric a month after you get the first couple in. And this sounds trivial even when I write it down, but guess what? This is very difficult. It takes time. I'm on the 4th week of a consulting talking with them every day. We still haven't got through some of this stuff. And we started, why are you running the project? How are we going to measure performance? And it is slow, because I'll tell you, until you answer these, you may never be successful. I threw in here one of these lessons learned slides for the last one on picking your metrics, because some are very difficult to come up with. The manufacturing one's easy. Call center's easy. Procurement, relatively easy. So I picked 4 of them that come up a lot in our classroom discussions. Let's talk about how do you measure the success of human resources, or HR? What's a good functional metric? My last company I worked at, HR had no metrics. And when we asked, all they wanted to do was employee turnover rate. And you see, I put that, but I lined up. That is a lousy human resources metric. Why? Because they can't affect it. They just process people in and out. If the work environment's bad or the work hours are long, yeah, that probably drives it more than anything. And last place I had the big employee loss problems because somebody else opened up was paying more. So employee turnover is a satellite or a very high-level metric for the way you run your whole business. Now maybe HR collects it and reports on it, but really that is not measuring the performance of HR. What I have here is lead time to hire, lead time to terminate. One of my favorites that I introduce is how long it, say within 1 week, what % of the workforce understands policy changes. You make a change to the 401k, change to the medical plan. Go out and find how well they're communicating, because I'll tell you, communicating policy is a huge HR issue. And another one is average time to close out employee issues. Now, if you go through what HR does, this covers most of their primary functions. QA is a tough one. QA is usually about quality of the business. QA metrics are like final product quality, but guess what? That's not measuring the performance of the function quality assurance. Things we look at is the rate of quality escapes. What are they not finding stuff? What's the cost per inspection they're doing? What's the cycle time or the lead time to get something through the inspection area? See, those are measures of quality assurance's function. Are they doing their job? Now, again, they may collect at that point final quality of your whole process, but see, that's not measuring QA, that's measuring your system. Procurement, purchasing, cost per PO, lead time to process a purchase order or an invoice, error rates, how often do they mess up an invoice or a purchase order, and the one that you see there I X'd out, spending to plan. Why in the world should the procurement or even the financial department be plotting spending to plan? That's really not their issue. They don't spend money, they watch it go by. Now they may collect it, but really that's a metric for a functional owner on how his budget's doing. It's really not a purchasing call. Last one I'll do is probably the hardest of all of them, your business improvement organization, your Six Sigma or Lean organization. You'll see what I crossed out were the 2 most popular ones. Dollars saved and number of projects completed. Another one that should be on there is number of people trained. Trace, those are not performance metrics. Some of here it says we will avoid measuring activity. You don't want to measure the fact that work's going on. You always want to measure the outcome of the work. So on-time completion of projects. Now that shows that you're executing them properly and fast. How about dollars per project spent? In other words, are you managing your budget well? Are you using it well? Average lead time to run a project, because if that's going up or long, it tells you something about the performance of your department. They can talk about project gains. Now, I love looking at the hard savings of a system, but you're doing that to justify the cost of the organization and the training. What we don't usually check, though, is at the 1-year point or 6-month point I've seen people use or somewhere there, were the gains still there that you put in place? In other words, you're checking the quality of your projects and your control plans to make sure they're still maintaining. So those are kind of metrics.
We have a question.
Great.
Do you usually see the improvement department to be different from quality department?
Wow, that's a great question. I'm going to take it anyway. And I don't know I guess I've never seen a consistent way that you needed to be successful. I have seen we'll just call it, okay, the improvement department. I have seen them reporting to operations. I've seen them reporting to quality. One of my favorites was they reported to human resources. I've seen them in their separate department that just was dotted line up to the staff but really didn't report to anybody. So they were really their own department. And I found that they all can work as long as the people in the department are not, they're free to go where the data requires them. The advice I give to anybody is generally you do not want to put the improvement resources in one of the key value-added functions so they can be treated as a labor source. We recommend attaching them to a support organization instead. Now, quality, it fits somewhat, but if you look at these people as just quality professionals, it's harder for them to work outside of the manufacturing or the service itself. It's harder for them to work in the support organizations. But that is, there's a lot of people that put them there. The other one deals with your culture. Can you even create a department? There's a number of organizations that have a virtual improvement team. Everybody is still in the head count of their original department, but they're like on temporary assignment the whole time, even for 2 years, so that they don't have a budget, they don't have a head count, and that way you also cannot be targeted for an overhead reduction because it's a virtual team rather than a department. So I don't know if I talked around it, but quality is not my recommendation to report them within the quality department. All right? Next. All right, so I talked about metrics, talked about how you can pick them. I hope you understand that. This next section is leading towards the bottom, how you can make them useful. Why? A lot of scorecards don't last very long in organizations. They start for the right purpose. They're going to give better information to their leadership and their workforce to make decisions. They get excited, they read the book, they passed it around, they spend a lot of money, especially software, because, boy, if you can do it on a computer, it's got to be better than doing it by hand. Lots of work gets put into development and tracking, and labor goes on. People are trained all over the place. For a full-fledged system, literature says it will take almost 1% of your labor force or your work hours to maintain a fully fledged moving scorecard dashboard system. Now, they're generally talking about 1% of the staff if you have a huge labor force that just does call centers, manufacturing, things like that. So it's really of the staff people, about 1%. So 1 of 100 people on staff are full-time doing this. And I found that to be very close to what I see in actual usage in places. But many of them, after they get a great start, looks good, they die. They go away, disappear. It becomes a dead-end job. We generally see it because they didn't create an infrastructure to support it. Same reason you do control plans for Lean Six Sigma projects. If you don't put a system to maintain it, it goes away. The system wasn't kept current. In other words, they didn't keep updating it. It started to have old or obsolete data in it, so people ignored it. The last one's more psychological. If you ever get an indication from it that you ignore, everybody's going to ignore all of them all of a sudden. So you either have it and do it, make it actionable every time, or you probably shouldn't have done it in the first place.
Rick, we have a couple questions.
Go ahead.
On the last slide. Are key metrics on slide 29 30,000-foot level?
Many of those are 30,000-foot level, meaning these are metrics in a layman's term. These are the things that a leadership would look at to make the daily, weekly, and monthly business decisions. How they staff people, where they send people, what are we going to do? That's a 30,000-foot level metric. So yeah, they really are. I like to think the 30,000-foot level ones, they are the ones that tell you the health of the function. No different than taking your temperature if you're not feeling well. If you're running a temperature of 101, it doesn't tell you what's going on, but it's an immediate indicator that you need to troubleshoot yourself. And that's what most of these 30,000-foot level and the example metrics should be. They don't point to a cause. They just point that something's not right.
The next question is, why can't dollars saved be used as metrics in improvement departments?
Oh, that's a great one. Dollars saved is important, but then I'd ask, why do you care? Well, most people do it to justify their existence. All right? I believe everybody captures it and collects it. Now, people may argue on, should it be hard savings or soft savings? Our general recommendation is only track hard savings to talk about your gains, but you must do soft savings projects. The difficulty is, I would ask whoever asked the question, does the amount of money saved talk about any influence on how hard or difficult the project was or how well you executed it? In my last company, the most high-dollar project that was hard savings that came about was from a yellow belt. And our procurement department, he looked at the decision on purchase order versus purchasing cards. He saved more money in that project in a 3-month effort than I, as a master black belt, did in all my projects there. So they're used to justify it, but the question is, the amount of money you save on a project, does that tell you about the health or the performance of your organization? And I'd say it doesn't. Because if you look at the life cycle of even a healthy Lean Six Sigma program, say it runs 5 years, the first year you get high dollar savings. In the second, they're even higher. But generally after that, the dollar savings start dropping way off per year because you've got all the big ones. Now you're working at more difficult, harder projects. They take longer. There's less savings there. They're more cultural based, but they're probably also more important to the health of the organization. So what we find is the dollar saved is not a good measure of, are your people competent in doing a good job. So I wouldn't measure it as a performance measure in January, how am I doing? In February, how am I doing? In March, over time. You generally look at it a yearly thing as you would performance to a budget. Did I meet my goal? At the end of the year, did I do well? But it's not something that your leadership would want to look at and decide to retask your organization this month because our dollar saved was low this month. And that's why it's not a routine metric that shows you the performance of your individuals, because it really is a function of external stuff. In our lingo, it's probably closer to a satellite metric than it is a 30,000-foot level metric, because the dollar saved is a function of so many things, especially if you consider soft savings. Are they real or not? I've also seen companies game it to keep their numbers up. And that's one reason why we don't like it as a metric. One of my peers at a company up in North Texas, their consultant said, I won't certify you unless you have $100,000 saved in your project. Let me show you how to adjust the dollars to get there. See, just the fact that people do that, well, let's count this one for 3 years or 5 years to get the numbers up. Just because of that, it doesn't make it a very good metric. So I think you hit one of my buttons. But thank you for the questions. I really appreciate it. Keeping it relevant. The infrastructure is where we're going to go next. Generally, you should be reviewing your performance metrics at least once a month. Now, I've seen every other week, and that's almost too fast once you have a mature system, but it's okay when you're in development. At each review, you look for indications of the process change. All right? You want to know, did your process change? Not red, yellow, and green tells you capability-based, but it doesn't tell you statistical or control chart views. Is the performance relevant? Does it represent what we know? And I think it's a great question. With every chart you review, here's what it says. Is this how we know the process to be or the function to be executed? Because a lot of times you'll find that there's a real problem going on, but the metric doesn't show it. Or the metric shows that something's going wrong, and you know it's not. So that relevance issue you should ask every time you review it to make sure that it's telling you what you think it is. Also, to be relevant, all improvement projects and business initiatives should be tied to one of the scorecard metrics. That in the execution of whatever it is, this metric should be changing. If it isn't, you haven't finished. Now, during every meeting, it says every metric will be evaluated, and it should be, and I've had people run through different groups, and that's okay too when you're starting out, but the decision is keep the metric, drop it, or modify it to make it better. I don't think it's on this slide, but generally when I see people do this, oh, here it comes up, about 20% of all metrics are changed each month when you're early on the first year or two. Why? Because you captured it and it wasn't captured all the time. Or we know things went bad. We had a huge problem with one of the pieces of equipment, or the phone lines went down and the call center had problems. This metric doesn't show it. That's a reason to drop it or change it. Maybe I need to average differently or sample at a different rate. But generally, about a fifth of them, 1 out of 5, you toss out every month and add a new one. But also keeping it very small. You want to start small and build on it until you've got stable metrics. Because if you don't act on every change indication, you will undermine the system. If you know that a process changed and the metric doesn't show it, you've got to get rid of the metric, because therefore it's not measuring what you wanted. And I want you on the bottom here, focus on the metrics that are the overall functional performance, not an internal one. Your goal is like taking your temperature. Is it healthy or not? All right? And I like to think, if you're having these reviews and you see them as a burden, you're not doing them right. These are supposed to be a positive nature and knowing what we're doing. Just about done here. So if you have final questions, you can start thinking about them and typing them. How does this relate to DMAIC or Lean Six Sigma black belt tools? Well, built into the value chain, identification of your functional processes. Folks, that's process mapping, just like we did. Could be value stream mappings related to it. DMAIC tool, define the functions of your organization. How about linking metrics to these functions? Well, at some level, that's what your SIPOC does. It gives you the inputs and the outputs. There's a measurement of some of the metrics. Quality of the inputs, on-time inputs, quality of the outputs, on time of the output, but also the define phase discussion, as I talked about in the presentation. That whole question of coming up with your project metrics, that's really the same thing we're doing for every business function. Assume the function is inadequate and you have to develop the project metrics to improve that function. That's the same thought process you should use to identify metrics. I guess I covered identifying metrics, the whole primary, secondary metric issue, the cost, quality, time. Those are the same concepts. Maintaining relevance, which is the part people forget, but that's not much different than a control plan. What do you put in place to make sure the system maintains itself? Like if you're doing metric management meetings every month, it should be audited, it should be checked, someone should write a report. Same thing you would do if you're writing a control plan for a project. You have to make sure that it's managed. So, next poll, as we finish this up here. Select the choice that best describes how your organization uses data, capitalized, and scorecards versus intuition in making your business decisions. Now, I know you don't know the exact answer, but take a shot. There are companies that love data and won't make a decision without it, and there's some that think that data just gets in the way of what you believe. So I wonder where you fall on this, or you think your company does. We're getting in there. We got, ooh, it's the 60 to 80% is doing well. So it's not everything, but it's most of them. I'll give you a couple seconds here to finish that one up. Because that's good. I guess that's why you guys are listening to this seminar. You are sort of data-based in the first place. See, if you took away, most people use it quite a bit, and that's excellent. The question is, could you be at 100%? I don't know if you ever want to be there, but I'll tell you, you should never ignore data that you do have. So thank you for that. But I guess that's the kind of people that are in this field. That's the end of the webinar. So come up with your questions. So did we cover everything? If you're teaching learning objectives, you've got to cover them in the end to make sure you did it. A method to develop a scorecard with balance. Yeah, we did that. The functional process map, the value chain. By getting all the support functions, that gives you the balance. How about creating multi-level scorecards so different people can look at different? That's really the drill down of the process. You can expand a single function to be one dashboard. It's got all the drill down metrics. That becomes that manager or that function's dashboard. And with all the drill downs, the metrics that attach at that level of the chart become its specific one. The last one, make sure it's of a value. Now, how do you do that? You have to keep it relevant. Because if leadership's not looking at it and using it to make their decisions, you're probably wasting time and money putting it together. So that's really all I have for the prepared material. I would like you to enter your biggest takeaways from the session today, or a question. Just something you take away, meaning something that you, a pearl of wisdom or a thought that's going to make you think a little more about what we've been covering. Because I'll tell you, if you cannot generalize these talks, you're not getting all the gain of it.
Here's a question. You propose something radical using data, not opinion. Does this work well?
Well, that's a fun one. Yeah, trying to make more data in your decision-making process. I find it's easy for organizations that came up database, but if you're in a very service-oriented organization that doesn't have a lot of data, it becomes difficult. People have been successful because they went with their gut and they were right enough times they want to keep doing it. Best I can say is if you have an organization that likes the intuitive or the emotional decision-making, ask them if you can collect data to support it or not support it and provide it. I think most of the time people are right, but when you can follow it up with data, pretty soon you'll realize they had the data early. They could have been more sure about it. But it is tough. I find most companies, when they get organizations, start using more data than they did originally. But I'll tell you something, you should never not act because there is no data if you believe so. So it's not an absolute. Mallory?
And the next question, we use Excel for red, yellow, green scorecards, and management likes that. Why should they change?
Well, this goes to I put my hand around your shoulder and say, if the management wants it, you'll always give them what they want because they write your paycheck at some level. But at the same time, that should not be a constraint to the only thing you do. People like red, yellow, green because if it's green, you can ignore it. If it's red, they can question it without ever understanding anything about it. It gives them a feeling of some level of control. I would recommend if you look at red, yellow, greens, those are just measuring use. Those are reasonable when you have a clear specification. I probably would avoid them if it's arbitrary, but follow it up with something we talked about in the last session, a control chart or capability analysis, and say, yes, it showed up red, but here's what red triggers a data analysis rather than act upon the red. Treat it sort of like a special cause event on a control chart, investigate it, but when you do your report on it, use other tools in red, yellow, green. All right?
Those are all the questions, so please type in any additional questions that you may have.
Well, thank you, everybody. We're just coming up to an hour. I appreciate you listening. Hope these sessions are interesting to you. You will have an exit survey to fill out. Please do. There's some different types of questions than we've been asking before in them. We use every one of these as a data collection plan, albeit survey data, not the greatest. There is some interesting stuff. If you have specific things you would like to put in the exit survey, there was 2 people on the last session that had specific stuff. We contacted them and talked about them, so we appreciate all that. Looks like, do we have one last minute coming in? Nope. All right, then. Thank you very much for your time, and have fun. We'll see you at the next webinar.